If you've been scrolling through endless spec sheets, watching video after video trying to decide whether a tower is worth the space on your desk, and still feel that uneasy what if I pick the wrong one tug, stick around. I've spent the last couple of days setting up a few mid-range desktops, talking to people who run a home office, a small design studio, and even a couple of gamers who just need the extra horsepower for streaming. The goal of today's review is to cut through the marketing blur and tell you exactly when the ASUS V500 makes sense and when you might be better off looking elsewhere. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the V500 is marketed as a home and business machine, and that dual identity is the first thing to test in real life. I plugged it into a modest 24-inch monitor, added a second 27-inch display via the HDMI and DisplayPort outputs, and ran my usual workflow, a few browser tabs, a Microsoft Teams call, a Photoshop session, and a background render of a 4K video. The Intel 13th Gen i7-1360P, despite being a useries chip more common in laptops, holds its own when you throw multiple apps at it. You'll notice the system jump to the higher performance cores when you start the render, and the low power cores keep the background tasks from stealing bandwidth. In practice, that translates to a Teams call that stays crisp while the render quietly ticks away in the background, with no sudden stutter. The 32GB of DDR5 RAM is the first thing that feels like a real safety net. In my test, opening a 50-page PDF, a 20GB Photoshop file, and a spreadsheet with a few 100,000 rows never caused the system to dip. For anyone who routinely works with large datasets, high-resolution images, or multiple virtual machines, that amount of memory means you won't be forced into constant swapping or closing applications to make room. The good news is the V500 lets you expand up to 64GB, so the machine can grow with you if your workload suddenly spikes. Storage is where the V500 really tries to stand out, a 2TB PCIe NVMe SSD. In everyday use, you'll notice the OS booting in under 10 seconds, applications launching almost instantly, and large files copying at speeds that make a noticeable difference compared to a traditional SATA drive. For a small business that needs to archive client files or a creator who works with 4K footage, that kind of throughput can shave minutes off daily tasks. However, there's a hidden trade-off. The tower does not include a secondary drive bay, so if you ever need a dedicated backup drive, you'll have to use an external USB-C enclosure. That's not a deal-breaker for most, but it's worth noting if you prefer an internal redundancy solution. Connectivity on paper looks solid: Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.2, a gigabit Ethernet port, and a handful of USB-C and USB-A ports. In a real-world home office, the Wi-Fi 6E module gave me a stable 400 megabits per second link on a fairly congested 5 GHz band, which was more than enough for video conferences and cloud backups. The presence of a USB-C 3.2 Gen 2 port means you can hook up a fast external SSD or a modern docking station without needing an adapter, something that often trips up older desktops. One minor downside is the lack of an SD card reader, which many photographers still rely on for quick offloading. It's an easy add-on with a cheap external reader, but it's a small inconvenience that adds up if you're moving a lot of media. Now, who should actually buy this machine? If you're a remote professional who needs a reliable workhorse that can juggle video calls, multiple productivity apps, and occasional heavy rendering without breaking a sweat, the V500 hits a sweet spot. Small design studios that run Adobe Creative Cloud across a couple of monitors will appreciate the mix of RAM and fast SSD. It also suits educators or students who are dabbling in coding, data analysis, or light game development tasks that benefit from a decent CPU and a lot of RAM without requiring a dedicated graphics card. The pre-installed Windows 11 Pro is another plus for businesses that need the extra management tools and BitLocker encryption right out of the box. On the flip side, if you're a hardcore gamer who expects a high-end GPU, this isn't the machine for you. The V500 ships without a discrete graphics card, and while the i7-1360P can handle some older titles at modest settings, modern AAA games will quickly expose its limits. Likewise, if you're looking for a compact mini PC that can hide under a TV or sit on a shelf, the V500's tower footprint is a bit larger than the ultra-small form factors you'll find from other brands. Finally, if you have a strict budget and can get away with a refurbished business desktop that already has a decent CPU and enough storage, You might find a better price-to-performance ratio elsewhere. Practically speaking, the biggest strength of the V500 is the balance between future-proofing and immediate usability. The DDR5 memory and PCIe 4.0 SSD give you speed that will stay relevant.